So good morning everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. My name is John Stanton from SFW and I'll be chairing today's session. I'd also like to introduce Ben Henderson from RecordPoint, who will be presenting today's webinar. And also present is a supporting panel who will be able to assist with queries at the end of the session. So here's our agenda for today's session. I'll start with a brief introduction to SFW and why we've arranged this session, and I'll then hand over to Ben, who will introduce the RecordPoint product and run a demonstration. So just quickly before we get started, there's a few items of housekeeping we should cover first. We'll be recording today's session, which we'll make available for you to revisit should you wish to after the session and share with colleagues. We'll also take questions at the end of the session. So if you'd like to pose a question, please use the console to send us a message. We'll respond to as many of these as possible, and if there's anything that we run out of time to cover, we'll get in touch with you directly and respond after the webinar. And lastly, if you have any difficulties with the webinar, please try closing the application and rejoining. That fixes the majority of issues. So to briefly introduce SFW in the context of today's session, we've been designing and implementing enterprise-scale electronic document and records management systems for 15 years, working primarily with public sector clients including the Home Office, Surrey Police and Youth Justice Board. The reason we've arranged this session today is primarily due to two themes we're hearing a lot about at the moment. So firstly, we're seeing a growing number of content sources that organisations need to manage, in particular external content sources such as social media, which is increasingly used by public sector to engage with the public. And secondly, there's a rapidly increasing interest and take-up of Office 365 following Microsoft's confirmation of launching UK data centres. Now both of these are often introduced by business areas such as IT and corporate communications to deliver significant benefits to the organisation. But the requirement to maintain compliance with information and records management legislation remains as vital as ever, along with the need to support the organisation with delivering enterprise search capability. So on that note, I'd like to introduce RecordPoint, an SFW partner who deliver a technology solution that ensures records management best practice is maintained in ever more complex environments. Ben will now take you through a brief overview of RecordPoint and a demonstration of the software. Over to you, Ben.
Great. Thanks, John. Good morning, everyone on the call. Nice to speak to you today, and excited to take you through what's going to be probably around 45 minutes worth of webinar here with some time for questions, and then let you all get off to some lunch for those of you that are here in Europe today. So a little bit first around RecordPoint. We had our first customers back in 2007 in the early days of SharePoint 2007, where we were focused really on providing high-end records management on top of the capability of SharePoint. We now today obviously work with SharePoint in its latest forms of 2013, and even as of I think next week we'll be working with 2016 as well. We have hundreds of thousands of users across the globe, and our offices are based here today in London, but also we have offices in Seattle, right next to the Microsoft HQ, and where we were founded, which was in Sydney, where we were born. The latest data and analytics from Gartner say that RecordPoint has roughly 45% global market share in the SharePoint add-in space for records management, and we do that really by preaching our mantra, which is right here, and that is that we try and solve the complexity of records management with SharePoint, because historically records management has been quite a difficult, expensive and challenging thing to build out and maintain. Primarily Office 365, SharePoint applications and those types of things are now widely adopted within organizations, or are being looked at widely adopted. So it's proving to be another challenge and complexity into the mix. And as I said, our philosophy is taking advantage of the platforms that you currently have within your organization, utilizing those and extending those out to become a compliant records management solution. Let's just give you a quick overview here of some of the customers that we have. And the main reason that those customers come to us, and we'll go through this in the demonstration, but this really is around 4 pillars, and that is we focus hugely on usability. We put that prime front and center of what we always talk about, making sure that end users can use the systems that they are used to using, and in this case obviously SharePoint and Office 365. We achieve great usability by automating the records management process, whether that's capturing, classifying and finalizing, or all of those different features. We do all of that behind the scenes, taking it right away from the end users so that they actually don't realize that they're using a records management system. We lower the TCO, or we have a lower TCO enabling that, because we're building on top of the investment that you've made in the Microsoft stack and in Office 365. And we enable compliance everywhere because we reach out to other parts, other systems that you might be utilizing. In today's demo, I'm going to demonstrate how we do that with Yammer, which is part of the Office 365 piece as well, but it kind of has been brought in and fishtailed in at the end of Microsoft's I guess, solution there. So we actually extend out and can manage records within other solutions, whether that's social media, as I said, but also actually file shares and Office 365, all doing it from one central place, enabling you to do good records management without having to navigate to a bunch of different locations. This is just a quick slide to basically tell you that we're compliant with a number of standards. Some of the important ones there are the top international standards, 16175 and 15489. Also MOREC 2010 down there at the bottom is also something that we're getting towards accreditation to. How we do that, how we enable the kind of compliance, is by doing and enabling features. These features extend the out-of-the-box SharePoint and Office 365 capabilities, and we'll go through a lot of these features in the demonstration today. I'm not going to particularly hold on these. You can see and read the slide there to see all of the features that we extend. The one that we'll start off with is obviously the centralized dashboard that groups all of the records from the system into one central location. And the final slide that I'm going to go through before we jump into the demo is a couple of the products that we have. So we do still today deal with organizations that are using RecordPoint on top of a SharePoint on-premise environment. We can also in this product connect out to Office 365 for those customers that are using a hybrid environment. And we also have a fully SaaS offering, Records 365 cloud-based solution that we can offer for people that are all in on Office 365 and don't wish to have any on-premise infrastructure. So that's a really quick overview of RecordPoint, and I wanted to keep it quick because I wanted to allow as much time as possible for a demonstration and for you to see the solution itself. So let's go over to that. I'm just going to come out of this presentation, and I'm going to start here with the end user's view. So this is an Office 365 SharePoint site that's been built for effectively an intranet portal. It's got a number of different sub-sites. So in this case, we have a number of departments that have got their own areas that they can manage their content within. And I'm also bringing in some content right here from Yammer as well. And actually, first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put a post on Yammer, which is part of the Office 365 suite and is their new social networking capability for those of you who aren't aware of what this is. So I'm just going to type in quickly here, just doing an SFW webinar. I'm going to post that into the company stream. So you can see that that goes into my company stream and is available for the organization to see through the Yammer platform. I'm next going to mimic the user or the employee persona of someone that's sitting within finance. So I'm going to go into my department, finance, and in here I have a number of locations. I have a number of document libraries that are set up for me to do what I do as part of my day-to-day work. So we can see here I've got a nice graphic on the front that's giving me some expense trends by month, all nice and flashy kind of SharePoint-rich content. But in this example, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to create a new contract, because that's important to me. That's something that I do as part of my job here within the finance team. So I'm going to create a new contract, and I do that simply by coming in here, and this has been set up to allow me to create these, what they call document sets, that enable me to add content into the system. So here I'm just going to create a new contract for keyboards. So a nice simple contract example. The contract would probably have a number. I'm going to make one up here. And the contract will have a value. So in this case, the contract value is going to be 100,000, 10,000, $100,000 dollars. And I'm going to have a contract end date. And in this case, the end date is going to be perhaps the end of the month, but it's going to be in 2017. Now, me as an end user completing in this information is really nice and easy. I as someone who deals with contracts, can easily enter in information into the system because it's asking me what I know about the contractor. Because I'm in the finance team, I can fill in this information. It's important to note that what it's not doing is asking me any records information. So it's really enabling that user adoption. It's built for the end user. But what we're going to see is that records is done in the background. So from a records standpoint, what the end user doesn't realize is that by entering in a contract value, he's actually deciding which part of the business classification schema this contract is going to sit in. And also by entering in a contract end date, he's actually deciding at what point in the future this contract is going to be disposed of, because this is the disposition trigger date. That's what we call it here. But obviously the end user doesn't know that. They don't need to know that. They're just creating a contract, and they're going to add some items into the location. So I'm just going to save this, which is going to create the document set. And I'm going to create a new document in here. So I'm just going to create a new Word document. This is going to open up my my Word system, my Word Online here, and I'll be able to obviously type away and create my document. Because of the usefulness of SharePoint, so let me just give this a quick name. So this is contract details. Because of the integration between SharePoint and Word, then I can just go ahead and create this simple document. So, hello. Save that. It's actually saving in the background, and once that's saved, I can go back to my location where the item is saved. Now, there's absolutely the possibility that I may well want to drag and drop content into this, because I've been working on that content on my desktop. That's absolutely possible. If I want to, upload a bunch of items, then it's nice and easy to do. And as you can see here, the contract details has been added into this location. So this is really just me using SharePoint or Office 365 to add content into my department location that's been designed for me with some simple concepts around what content I work with, and you would obviously build this out across all of your departments that are using SharePoint to ensure that they have the right constructs in place and the right information architecture in place to do that. In the background, what's actually happening is that this item is undergoing a RecordPoint automation engine. So one of the key pillars there was that we automate records management, and the way that I have this configured, and this is absolutely configurable to meet your requirements within your organization, but the way that I have it configured here today is that any content that goes into these locations within Office 365 sites gets automatically a record number, goes through our rules engine, and becomes a record. So what we'll see from this item is that it's actually being classified already against our business classification schema. It's being given a disposal date and a kind of duration at which that should be kept held for. But the end user doesn't really need to see any of that. We do give them the option to see it, and they can come into a deep location within Office 365 to view the record summary, where they'll be taken to that information. And providing this has happened quick enough, and I'll keep my fingers crossed to hope that it's been through our rules engine in the time that I've been talking, we'll actually see that this item has been classified and it's got a unique record number. And there we go, it's pulled back that information. So this has a unique record number, which is 1546, and that's a unique record number across the entire system. It's been given a classification, which is the local government classification schema that I'm using in this example, within procurement, within contracting, within contract awards, and it's been assigned as a major contract. And the reason that it's been assigned as a major contract is that the value of that contract has effectively determined that it should be defined as a major contract. It's been given a disposal action and also a destroy date. So in this case, it's going to be destroyed in 2036, so in about 20 years' time, that's going to be destroyed. Quite a long time. Now, it's still an active document. It's still kind of a, SharePoint and Office 365 is a collaboration space, so it could still be edited. It's not been what we call finalized. As you can see here at the bottom, the finalization type is not applicable yet. So the items can still be worked on. It can be versioned. It can be go through all of the things that you would expect from an Office 365 collaboration site. And at some point in the time, that item can be finalized, and that's the final bit of the kind of record life cycle from an end user's perspective, and that is that it's made read-only. Now, it can happen automatically at a period of time, so let's say a year after it was last modified, or it can happen by an end user clicking on the button within the SharePoint site. That's completely, again, down to whether or not you want to drive user behavior, or whether you're aware that your users might not actually finalize content and you would rather set a policy to automatically do that. So that's the kind of final bit in that suite. So again, just to reiterate, from an end user's perspective here, I'm just using SharePoint or Office 365, uploading my content as I would do effectively without records management in place. So a really, really nice interface to drive your users to adopt the platform and not be, I guess, hindered by some of the records management constraints that they might have felt have constrained them in past systems. What we're now going to do is we're going to flip over to the records management view of the world, because what we offer is effectively two views of the same content. This has all been end user world, and what we're now going to see is the records manager's view of this same content that's sitting in all of the SharePoint locations across the environment, including, for example, Yammer. And this is the RecordPoint interface. This is that dashboard that I briefly talked about, where your records managers can come and effectively manage all of the content that's sitting within your records, or that is sitting within your environment that is the RecordPoint control. I have some nice statistics here around how many records are within my system, how many rules I have that's doing this automation of records management. I also have some disposal information around how many items have been disposed, both at the record level or at the file level. And I can go into this, so I can click on the records link here. It takes me right in to see the records that are in the system. And straight away at the top here we have the stream effectively of records within the system. So here we have the contract details that I uploaded and created there within my finance contract site. And it's there, it's been given its record number, it's got a disposal action date associated with it. So I can perform many actions on this content once I select it, without me having to go and navigate to that location to do records management. One of the huge burdens of having lots of systems with lots of content in various places is having to go to all of these areas to perform actions. We allow that right from this central console. So this is the kind of RecordPoint actions that can take place. It's also worth noting that right below that one is that first Yammer post that I did as well. So there's just doing an SFW webinar post that's been sucked in from the Yammer application there, and is also being managed as a record. It also has a life cycle, and this one's a much shorter life cycle. This is actually only going to be destroyed after 2 years. And again, the rules kicked in. They said it's a piece of Yammer content, so it should only be kept for a certain period of time. That's different, obviously, to what contracts should be kept for. So that's effectively how we go about browsing some of the records, but one of the more useful ways to browse is actually to go through the records classification. And I can go through this classification, and this classification will obviously be designed and built by yourselves to be relevant to the content that you're using. But I can go through this and I can navigate through a hierarchical classification and go into where the content sits. So in this case, I'm going to go into my major contracts, where that contract that I've just created is being classified to. And now you can see on the right-hand side, I've actually got all of the content that is classified against that retention. So here I've got 8 results from across all of my systems for this particular classification. I can obviously then perform actions on this. I can perhaps view content. I can perhaps might want to get an export of this content, so I can select all of the items and run an export of this into a kind of a CSV file or an Excel file. So I can do some nice good management processes right from within here. If this isn't quite what I'm looking for, then I can scroll a bit further down and use the filter panel to dive down even further on some of the content that I'm interested in looking at. So here I could perhaps say, well, it's this particular record format that I'm interested in, certainly electronic record format, and actually I want to look at all of the content that's going to be kept permanently as opposed to destroyed across the entire system. So I can apply these filters, and that will again narrow the content down. This is all built up on effectively a search layer, just to kind of go into a little bit of detail there. And that search layer just I guess, allows you to customize this page heavily to your requirements. These are just columns, so you can change these columns, you can resort these columns. These filters here on the left-hand side again can be customized based on what you're looking to do, the kind of searches and filters that you're looking to apply to that content. So don't think that this is stuck for everyone and this isn't relevant to you. So that's effectively browsing content. What I'm going to do is go into a little bit of detail around how we automate the process of records management, because we have something called a rules engine, and that rules engine is effectively run on any content that's coming into Office 365 or your SharePoint sites, and it tries to classify the content. So it looks for bits of information within the items, within the records, and matches it to what we call patterns that we'll create. And then if those patterns are hit, it will go against an outcome, and that's the classification, the record classification. So let's look at that in a little bit more detail so it makes a little bit more sense. I'm just going to show you the rule that this contract details hit. So this is the rule that's displayed here. And I'm going to go into that and show you that it's a fairly complex rule, this. This is a rule that has 2 patterns that we're looking for. So we're looking for any content, in this case, that is coming from a list that equals contracts. So in my entire corpus of records that are out there in the repositories that I'm managing, if the list that it's coming from equals contracts, then this pattern is going to hit. We're also looking for a piece of metadata associated with that record that is called contract value, that is associated with the container that it's sitting within, and that contract value needs to be greater than or equal to 1 million. So what we're doing there, just to kind of step back a little bit, is we're saying that the content needs to come from this place, but it also needs to be in a document set or a site or a folder that has a piece of metadata called contract value, and that value of the metadata needs to be greater than 1 million. And if those 2 patterns are hit, we know that it's a major contract, and you can see down the bottom here that the outcome is the major contract. It sits at a classification level, and its disposal action is destroy 20 years after it was created, or sorry, after the contract end date. So quite a, I guess, a sophisticated rule here that's really targeting one type of information. If we look at the outcome for this rule, we can see that the trigger date, so the point at which the clock's going to start ticking, is the contract end date for that contract. So that's how we're judging when this content should be disposed of. So it's not necessarily done on the date that the document was created or last modified. It absolutely can be done on that, but here it's done as at the contract end date, and these can all be changed and adjusted. The outcomes can also, in this case, not just be destroy as I have, but I can actually change this to be keep permanently, transfer, or review, and they're the options that are available at the end of the disposition period. I'm just going to come out of this and show you a slightly more broad rule. And the reason behind me showing you this is I really want to just show you and explain that you don't have to have such complex rules in the system. You can have some nice broad rules that are just doing general classification, and that seems to be a lot of the way that our customers are going these days in the UK, is having these big bucket approaches for classification and then using rules to categorize that content into those big buckets. So here, if I go into my validate rule for the Yammer post, we can see that this rule is a very simple rule. All this is looking for is that there is a piece of metadata on this record that's saying the record source system is from Yammer. And if that's the case, then the classification is a simple classification, short term. So again, a nice, easy, broad example of how you can not be so specific with your patterns and your rules, and classify content in some of the more generic big buckets. And that's the process that we actually like to kind of guide our customers down. We like to create some nice big rules, some broad rules that will classify a lot of the content, and then we manage by exception, and we go in a little bit more detail into the areas that are perhaps a little bit more high risk in certain areas, perhaps legal and finance, where they have much more specific content that needs to be kept for either a longer time or a very specific amount of time, and we'd write rules specific to those areas. So that's the approach that we'd take in this rules writing, and it's actually really easy to create those rules either within the system or outside of the system in an Excel spreadsheet and just upload them in through our importing tool. So that kind of concludes the rules overview and shows you how the content would be classified. I just want to point out a few things in here of some of the actions that are available to us that are available right from within here, and usually you'd have to go to the various SharePoint sites that you're managing to see this information. But I can go and bring up the information for the record. So here we can see that we have a barcode value, and this barcode is to keep it consistent with the physical records that I may well be managing within the system as well. And I can see information such as what it's classified against, what's the disposal action due date, the trigger date that's driving that disposal, some of the rules that it hits, the record author, and information around it right from within here. If I want a little bit more detail, then I can go in and see the metadata for the item, and this brings back, to be honest, a ton of information. And if you remember, as an end user, I didn't enter that much information into the system, but this information is available to us to drive those rules should I need to, and that's the power of the automation engine for us, is the fact that we actually don't need a huge amount of metadata from the end user in order to drive retention. We may well need a couple of pieces of metadata, but gone are the days of big profile pages that you have to fill out 10, 15, 20 pieces of mandatory metadata in order to get this content classified. This metadata that I'm showing here is just being automatically gathered from the system. It's also not just looked at the record in situ, it's looked at the location that record's gone into, so it's looked at the container and gathered all of the information about the container. It's also gathered information about who you are, who the person that's uploaded the content is, and the record author is. So we can go out to things like Active Directory and find out what part of the organization they sit in. There's a huge amount of information that's available to us without us actually having to kind of prompt the end user for all of that information. From here as well, I can view audit information. So this is retrieving the audit information for that specific record right here from within the record management dashboard. And I can view the version history now. I'm probably only going to have one version of this item. Oh no, I tell a lie, I've got 4. And actually the reason behind me having 4 versions for this item is that because I was using the online Word app that generates lots of versions for the item. So we can see here that I have all of my version history available to me here. If I go into this binary history, then I'll actually see the binaries and the records for all of these items as well. So I can get back that really useful information without the need for me to go into SharePoint, find that content, find those items, and try and surface it from within there. Some of the I guess the next part of the journey from a records perspective is legal hold, and that can obviously prevent the destruction of content, the disposal process, and the deletion of content. And I can place holds on any of the content that I have available here, and I can do that simply by just going through and navigating and selecting my content and going to the Manage Holds button on the ribbon. But what's more likely is that I'm actually going to do a search for some content. So what I would do is I would go into my search bar and do a record search, and now this searches the entire records system in order for me to bring back the content. So in this case, I'm just going to do a quick search that I know is going to bring back some content, but you may well be searching on something like the record author. You may well have even more information that you want to search on and even more properties that you want to search on, and those can all be added here as well. But effectively what we'll do is we'll do a search for that content, and that content brings back a bunch of information. You can see here that actually this is a Yammer tweet. That's the first one. If we scroll down, then we've got some documents coming back from our Office 365 system. We actually also have some documents and records brought back from our on-premise RecordPoint system, from our on-premise SharePoint system as well, because I've actually hooked this up to a SharePoint system that's on-premise too. So there's lots of content that can come back here, and then it's just down to me selecting the content and putting it onto a hold. So here I can add it to a hold. If one of the holds, if this is the hold already exists, then I can absolutely select it here. If it doesn't exist, then I would just create a new hold, and those items can be added to that hold and removed again from that hold at a later point. And as I mentioned, that just prevents the destruction of those records to enable you to manage those legal hold requests. Providing the content is up for disposal and isn't on hold, then the next step usually in this is the disposal process. So I'm going to just, I guess, talk to you in the interest of time around the disposal process. If I go into disposal, it's a bit of a wizard. So we actually walk you through a process that can be as short or as long as you wish to make it. I'm going to just go in and show you what that looks like. First of all, you create a batch, which to be honest is a little bit like a shopping basket. That's how I kind of try and describe it to people. And you add items into that shopping basket. So if I go to this one here, the next screen actually looks like a shopping basket because you have the little basket at the top right, and it shows you all of the items that are currently expired that aren't sitting within a batch. So I can absolutely add all of this content into my batch if I want to add everything that's currently up for disposal. There is an option here for me to narrow and drill into that content in a little bit more detail, so I can run a search across the items that are currently expired to drill down into perhaps some more specific content in there that I want to dispose of. So you have the ability to do that, but effectively you add your content into a batch, and then you can split it up a little bit further. So this is all of the content that I have in my current batch, and as I said, you can split it up a little bit further. So this is now allowing you to send out different views for approval of the disposition. And this is a good example of this might be that you have some HR records that are up for disposal. You also have some finance records that are up for disposal, and they need to be approved by different parts of the organization. What you can do is create a couple of different views within this system, and you can save those views and send those views out to different people. So once you have your view created with the items within it, then you can email out that to part of the organization that needs to approve the disposition. they will be sent a link. That link, I can preview the link here, sends them to this page, and this page just allows them to look at the content that's going to be destroyed, select the content, and approve and reject that disposition. So ideally they'd approve the disposition. Obviously they can reject it or unapprove the content. And once all of the content has been approved, then it's back over to the records manager within RecordPoint to come into the disposal process and apply the disposition action. So here I have a slightly different batch that's pending approval, and I can go in here and see that all of the content's been approved, and it's down to me as the records manager to dispose of that content. And I can do the disposal from here. We have the defensible disposal process because it's going to be recorded that it's being disposed of. We're going to keep the metadata. We're going to wipe the content to make sure that it can't be reconstructed. And we'll also keep the audit history of that item as well, so that you have a full record of what's happened to that item, including the destruction. And I guess that kind of rounds out the end of a records journey within its life cycle. Now, there's lots of different things that can happen in the way in that process. There's things like it being made read-only at a certain part, which I haven't gone through today, and I just haven't got the time to go through today. So needless to say that there's a lot of different configuration options that you can go on as we go through this. But I wanted to leave a little bit of time at the end to just circle back with John and see if there are any questions that have come into the system, and hopefully we'll have a bit of time to get through those, and if not, then we will certainly try and get to those questions at another time.
Lovely, thanks very much, Ben. So yeah, I'd like to open the floor to questions. So if anyone would like to pose a question, please do post it through the webinar, and we'll answer as many of these as we can. We do have a couple of questions coming in straight away. So the first question, someone has asked whether the webinar is being recorded. In fact, two questions on that. So yes, absolutely. So we are currently recording the webinar, and we'll be able to make that available to you fairly shortly after the webinar, and we'll be sending out an email to everybody with details on where you can find the recorded webinar. So absolutely everything we've covered today will be available for you.
Great. Yeah, we've got a couple of other questions coming in here. Someone here asks, what if something is deleted in error? We say that it's removed from the system so that it can't be reconstructed. Through a disposition process, we remove it from the system so that it can't be reconstructed. However, if someone deletes something in error from an Office 365 site, we still have the record of that. So we still have that content sitting within RecordPoint. We actually intercept the delete, and we keep it as a record so that we do still have it available here. If that person has put something up into RecordPoint that shouldn't have gone up to there, and they can actually obviously speak to the records team and get that record deleted, should that person within the records team have the permission to do that. So great question there. Next one here is what metadata is kept for disposal. So after a disposal is occurred, we keep all of the metadata associated with the record, so that you can see the information about it, and we do just get rid of that binary. So a great question there. Lots more questions coming in here. Hopefully we've got enough time to get through these. Auto classification. Person came in late here, so how does it work? Good question there, and we did kind of cover it through our rules engine. So if you were here to see the patterns and the outcomes, that's how we auto-classify content. We look for patterns within metadata, and then map those patterns into a classification schema. So thanks for the question there.
That part of the demonstration will be available on the recording for anyone who'd like to revisit that.
Yep. What if a whole batch isn't approved for disposal? Good question there. A whole batch does need to be approved for disposal, but it is possible for the records manager to take content out of the batch so that a disposition process can continue. So you'd remove the items that haven't been approved out of the batch. What is the difference between a container and a folder? Good question. Something that we didn't actually cover on today's call due to the lack of time is how we do aggregations and containers. We have effectively a virtual aggregation layer that allows you to map a electronic container such as a document set or a site or a folder to a record container, and in that we actually call those containers files. Something that I'd be happy to dig into in a bit more detail. That allows you to do some good things like case management, file management, employee record management, and those types of things where you can actually group things as a set of items and do disposition on those items at the files and at the aggregation level, as opposed to at the individual record item. How many administrative staff or records managers can you have using the system at one time? Assigned with the roles. Yep, so we have a full security system that's laid on top of this. You can assign roles out to certain parts of the records team, and effectively you can have as many people access the interface as you want. So hope that answers that question. Once a record has been identified for reaching the end of its life and needs to be reviewed, what will be the process be? Will a notification to the owner of the records manager? So absolutely, the records managers are notified that there are records up for the end of their life cycle, and a disposition process needs to happen, and then we facilitate that through the disposition process that I went through in the demonstration. Do you keep audit in the record center? So yeah, actually, for those of you who know about the kind of structure of SharePoint and records management, we do keep a lot of things within record centers. We're actually built on top of record centers, so we keep all of our information there, including the audit. What scale of documents records can be? What scale of documents records can be and is being managed through this product? Hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions? Certainly tens of millions. We actually have a very good scaling mechanism that scales on kind of out to millions of records. We have customers using tens of millions that are managing tens of millions of records, and you can imagine as we're adding more connectors. So I demonstrated here the Yammer Connect that produces a lot of records as well. So absolutely, we can create lots of records and manage lots of records. Can you report easily on the records which have been destroyed? Absolutely, you can. We have defensible destruction in that we show you exactly which records have been destroyed, who gave the approval for those destruction, and who actually destroyed the content. Also important to note that our reporting system hooks in through OData for anyone who's a little bit technical there. So you can hook this into things like Excel and Power BI to do reporting directly in those tools, and we surface all of that information through there. Great question there. Is everything in SharePoint managed as a record in RecordPoint, or do they need to be declared? So our philosophy is that everything within SharePoint is managed as a record in RecordPoint. However, that might not work for some people. So some people like to do things like have a button that does declare the item and make it declared. Other people like to have a workflow that after a period of time will kick in and make it declared. And some of our customers even go as far as having it so that minor versions aren't declared, but as soon as the first major version is created within SharePoint, then it is declared and known to as RecordPoint and goes through the rules engine and the classification phase. So that timing of when RecordPoint knows about the item can absolutely be changed. We've come up to the 11:45 mark here in the UK, which is at the point at which we said we'd end the webinar. So I'm going to pass it over to John to just thank everyone for this. There are still lots of questions coming in, so what I would say is keep them coming in. We will take a copy of these questions and we'll get back to you and follow up with you on these at a later point. But from my perspective, thank you very much for sitting through the demonstration and seeing how Office 365 and SharePoint can have effective records management and compliance applied to it. And if you do have any questions around the product, then no doubt we're going to be following up with information, so feel free to reach out to us. But John, over to you.
Good stuff. So just in closing, to really thank everyone for attending today, and just to recap on Ben's points, if you have any further questions at all, please do send those through to us. We'd be happy to help and engage in a little bit more detail. So on that note, may I wish you a good afternoon, and thanks again for your time.